The young cadet's laughter echoed through the classroom like a knife cutting through silence. "Hey guys, check out the old man's skin. Looks like a colouring book gone wrong." His friends snickered, their eyes fixed on the weathered figure standing quietly at the doorway. The old man said nothing. He simply walked toward the front of the room, his faded jeans and plain grey t-shirt revealing arms covered entirely in ink. Names, dates, symbols that meant nothing to the young soldiers lounging in their seats. But those tattoos held the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. If this story reminds you why we should never judge a book by its cover, type respect in the comments right now. Fort Bragg Military Academy had seen thousands of recruits pass through its doors over the decades. Young men and women full of fire and ambition, eager to prove themselves worthy of wearing their country's uniform. But this particular summer class was different. They were the elite candidates, hand-picked from the best military families across the nation, sons and daughters of generals, admirals, and decorated heroes. And perhaps because of their pedigree, some of them had developed an unfortunate sense of superiority. Private First Class Derek Morrison was the worst of them. At 22 years old, he had never seen combat, never heard a bullet whistle past his ear, never watched a friend take their last breath in his arms, but he carried himself as if he had conquered entire nations. His father was a 2-star general, and Derek made sure everyone knew it. On that humid August morning, Derek sat in the back row with his usual crew of admirers, waiting for their new tactics instructor to arrive. The position had been vacant for weeks after the previous instructor suffered a heart attack. Rumours swirled that the replacement was some retired nobody pulled out of obscurity, probably someone who couldn't hack it in the real military anymore. When the door finally opened and the old man stepped through, Derek's expectations seemed confirmed. He looked to be in his mid-60s, maybe older. His hair was silver and cropped short, his face lined with the kind of deep grooves that only decades of hard living could carve. But it was his body that drew every eye in the room. From his wrists to his shoulders, from his neck down to where his shirt began, the man was covered in tattoos. Not the kind you see on young soldiers trying to look tough. These were dense, intricate, overlapping, names written in careful script, dates that seemed to span decades. Small symbols, crosses, dog tags rendered in ink, what appeared to be coordinates, and phrases in languages none of the cadets recognized. Derek nudged his buddy with his elbow. "What did they do, hire a homeless guy off the street?" The room erupted in scattered laughter. The old man continued walking to the front, unhurried, his worn boots making no sound on the linoleum floor. He set down a single folder on the instructor's desk and turned to face the class. His eyes swept across the room, pausing on no one in particular, yet somehow seeing everyone. "My name," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel shifting, "is Master Sergeant William Hayes. Retired." Derek scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Retired is right. Should have stayed retired, Gramps." A few more laughs. Someone whispered something about a nursing home. Master Sergeant Hayes remained perfectly still. His expression didn't change, didn't harden, didn't show even a flicker of offense. He simply waited until the laughter died down, which took longer than it should have. Then he spoke again. "I understand you're the best candidates this academy has seen in years. Children of heroes, most of you, raised on stories of valor and sacrifice." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. But stories are just words, and words mean nothing until they're written in blood. Derek rolled his eyes. Here we go. Another lecture about the good old days when men were men and all that garbage. His friends chuckled nervously, but something in the room had shifted. There was a weight to the old man's presence that couldn't be dismissed no matter how hard they tried. Master Sergeant Hayes walked slowly around the desk and stood directly in front of the first row of cadets. He raised his right arm, the one closest to Derek's line of sight, and held it steady. "You think these tattoos look funny, Private Morrison?" It wasn't a question. Derek's smile faltered slightly. He hadn't expected the old man to know his name, but he recovered quickly, his arrogance pushing past his surprise. "I mean, yeah. It's like you fell into a printing press or something. What is all that stuff anyway? Prison ink?" A few uncomfortable laughs, but most of the room had gone quiet. The air itself seemed to thicken. Master Sergeant Hayes lowered his arm slowly. He reached into the folder on his desk and pulled out a single photograph, yellowed with age. He held it up so the class could see. It showed a group of young soldiers in desert fatigues, their faces beaming with the immortal confidence of youth. Somalia, 1993, Operation Gothic Serpent. His voice remained steady, but something deeper trembled beneath it. These were my brothers. 24 of us went into Mogadishu that October. 18 came out. He touched his forearm, tracing a name tattooed just above his wrist. Corporal James Reyes, 20 years old. He loved country music and couldn't cook to save his life, which his wife reminded him of in every letter. He died covering my position when our convoy got ambushed. The room had gone absolutely silent. Derek's smirk had vanished, replaced by something he couldn't quite name. Discomfort, maybe, or the first stirrings of shame. The Master Sergeant's finger moved to another name. Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, 28, 2 kids back home in San Francisco. He was supposed to rotate out the week after that mission. Took a bullet meant for a 14-year-old Somali boy who'd wandered into the crossfire. Died before the medevac could reach us. Hayes continued moving through the tattoos on his arm, each name conjuring a face, a life, a death that had seared itself into his memory. Private Anthony Williams, who sang gospel hymns during night watches. Sergeant First Class David Kowalski, the best medic Hayes had ever served with, who bled out in a stairwell saving 3 wounded men. Specialist Maria Santos, one of the first women he'd served alongside, who called her mother every Sunday without fail, until a sniper's bullet ended those calls forever. The old man's voice never wavered, but his eyes had changed. They glistened now, not with weakness, but with the kind of pain that only grows deeper with time. Every tattoo on my body is a brother or sister I lost, not just in Somalia, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in places that don't exist on any official record. He pulled up his shirt slightly, revealing more names cascading down his torso. Dozens of them, possibly hundreds. 63 names, 63 lives that ended so that soldiers like you could sit in air-conditioned classrooms and laugh at an old man's skin. Derek felt something collapse inside his chest. His father had told him war stories, sure, sanitized versions meant to inspire, not to haunt. He had grown up thinking of combat as something glorious, a proving ground where the worthy rose and the weak fell away. He had never considered the cost, the real cost, not in strategic terms or casualty reports, but in human beings who laughed and loved and dreamed of going home. Master Sergeant Hayes lowered his shirt and looked directly at Derek. There was no anger in his eyes, no resentment, just a profound and terrible understanding. Private Morrison, I'm not offended by your laughter. I face things that would break a man in ways laughter never could. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But I want you to understand something. These tattoos aren't decoration. They're not a fashion statement. They are a cemetery I carry with me every day of my life. They're the only way I can make sure my brothers and sisters are never forgotten. Derek's throat had closed completely. He tried to speak, tried to apologize, but no words would come. Around him, his classmates sat frozen, many of them fighting back tears. The swagger that had filled the room when they arrived had evaporated completely, replaced by something humbling and heavy. The Master Sergeant returned to the front of the room. He picked up a piece of chalk and wrote 3 words on the board: respect, honor, memory. This class isn't about tactics, he said, turning back to face them. You'll learn plenty of that in your other courses. This class is about what it means to lead men and women into situations where some of them won't come back. It's about understanding that every soldier under your command has a mother who prays for them, a child who waits for them, a friend who needs them. He set down the chalk and let his hands fall to his sides. You can't learn that from a textbook. You can only learn it by looking at someone like me and understanding that one day you might become me, covered in the names of people you couldn't save, haunted by the choices you had to make and carrying grief so heavy that some days you can barely stand. Derek rose from his seat. His legs felt unsteady, his heart pounding against his ribs. Every eye in the room turned to him, expecting another joke, another dismissive comment. But the young man who had entered that classroom no longer existed. Master Sergeant Hayes, Derek said, his voice cracking despite his best efforts. I owe you an apology. I disrespected you without knowing anything about who you are or what you've sacrificed. I was wrong. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to continue. My father taught me that real strength is admitting when you've failed. I failed today, and I'm sorry. The Master Sergeant studied him for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Takes courage to own your mistakes, Private. That's the first step to becoming the kind of leader your soldiers will follow into hell. He extended his tattooed hand. His Derek crossed the room and shook it, feeling the calluses and scars of a lifetime of service. "I'd be honoured to learn from you, sir," Derek said quietly. "Then sit down and pay attention," Hayes replied, and for the first time a hint of warmth crept into his weathered voice. "We've got work to do." The remainder of that class session passed in a kind of sacred silence. Master Sergeant Hayes began teaching, and every single cadet hung on his words as if their lives depended on it, which, he reminded them, they eventually might. He spoke of leadership not as a position of power, but as a burden of responsibility. He shared stories of officers who had earned their soldiers' devotion, and cautionary tales of those who had squandered it. He talked about fear, and how every brave act he had ever witnessed came not from the absence of fear, but from choosing duty over terror. By the time the session ended, something fundamental had shifted in that room. The cadets who filed out were different people than the ones who had swaggered in. More than a few of them stopped to shake the Master Sergeant's hand, thanking him not just for the lesson, but for the reminder of why they had chosen this path in the first place. Derek was the last to leave. He lingered at the door, looking back at Hayes, who was quietly gathering his folder, and the old photograph of his fallen brothers. "Master Sergeant," Derek said. "Yes, Private." "My father told me once that the best soldiers are the ones who've learned humility. I think I finally understand what he meant." Hayes met his eyes. "Then maybe you've already learned the most important lesson I have to teach." Derek nodded and stepped out into the bright August sunlight, carrying with him the weight of 63 names he would never forget. Years later, Captain Derek Morrison would have his own story to tell, his own losses to mourn, his own scars to carry, and on his left forearm he would bear a single tattoo, the name William Hayes, who had passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years after that fateful class. Every time a young soldier asked about the tattoo, Derek would tell them the story of the old man with the funny-looking skin who taught him that true strength isn't measured in muscles or medals. It's measured in the names you carry, the memories you honour, and the respect you give to every single person whose path you cross. Because you never know what battles they've already fought. You never know what cemeteries they carry with them. And you never know when your own laughter might echo in a room full of ghosts, reminding you that humility isn't weakness. It's the foundation of everything that matters. If this story touched your heart and reminded you to honour those who serve, subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because respect isn't given, it's understood. And the ones who deserve it most are often the ones who never ask for it at all.